Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and, of course, Fighting on Film, because this is a crossover double bill show where there'll be three of us talking. But I just want at the beginning of this say we are in the middle, of course, of Pearl Harbor Week with some very reverential shows about the loss of life. And we're talking about the hospitals tomorrow. We're talking about the Medal of Honor recipients on Friday. We had the show on Monday with Drac talking about the Imperial Japanese Navy. Today, we are talking about the portrayals of Pearl Harbor on film. So it will be a little bit more lighthearted, but we're just going to explain at the beginning that we're still being all reverent to the fact that lots of people lost their lives, but the movies are kind of fair game. So I'm bringing in the two gentlemen who run the Fighting on Film podcast, Matt and Robbie. So good evening, Matt. Good evening, Robbie.
Hi, Woody. Hello. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And the pressure's on because you pre-record yours. It's live, so we have that interaction. People can tell us that we're wrong. They can give us their opinions. And folks, we do urge you all to give your opinions and tell us when you agree with us and tell us when you disagree with us. So just before we leap into this, how has it been kind of watching Pearl Harbor movies kind of like buses coming along one after the other? Because I'd never done that before. As you said a minute ago, I'm done now for a while.
Yeah. If you've seen one attempt at blowing up a load of war hawks or kitty hawks, you've seen them all, I think. It just all rolls into one at the end, I think.
And Matt?
Yeah, it's hard to sort of separate which film's done what at this point, because I've watched like 6, I think, now. And they all approach it in different ways, but some of them are quite similar in that they try and do an awful lot, let's say. Some are trying to depict Midway and others are depicting various different things. So it's been tricky, but I think I've got plenty of notes, so we should be okay.
Yeah, I've got a few notes as well. Of course, yeah, you bring up a good point there, Matt, is that Pearl Harbor films are not just always depicting Pearl Harbor. They're sometimes talking about the politics beforehand. They go on to events years in the future in some cases, and in one case, 40 years in the future, because it's a science fiction kind of crossover. So well, let's start at the beginning. So we're going to just quickly move through the fact that there were, right in World War II, some rather kind of quick released, instant reaction, lots of kind of revenge motifs. We're not really discussing these. You can see by the name of Menace of the Rising Sun that it's not trying to go for a balanced view of the Japanese enemy. It's all about
they're propaganda movies, aren't they?
It is what they are. I remember Pearl Harbor. Obviously, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo takes us into the Doolittle Ray, but it kind of starts with that post-Pearl Harbor reaction. Air Force does have the B-17 coming in, but kind of in a fictional setting. And Submarine Raider, I think, was made to have no connection with Pearl Harbor, but came out so close, they tried to kind of crowbar it into the plot a bit and have dastardly Japanese spies. But we're not covering these ones, folks. We're just saying there were these depictions that were released in the aftermath. And of course, you want to mention John Ford, don't you, Robbie?
Yeah, John. If you might not have seen it, you may be aware of it or not. John Ford, that expert documentary maker, won 6 Academy Awards for his documentary films. He made a film called December 7th, or 7th of December, and it was originally released as a 1.5-hour documentary, but it was cut up in 1943 and released at a half an hour runtime, and it won Best Academy Award for documentary in 1943. And it's a very jingoistic, as we say, like propaganda type film, but it's where all these sort of iconic images come in of recreations of Zeros coming in, shooting up loads of Kitty Hawks. You know, that it shows you every ship getting blown up and what's happening to the ship. So it plays a lot more like a traditional history documentary. But then at the end, it also comes in and talks about how Honolulu is going to be revitalized, rebuilt. It's, you know, now it's a fortress. It's not a victim anymore, and it's how America's going to respond with war material and men and go and beat the enemy. So it gets quite jingoistic. But as a depiction by John Ford of the events, I think it's worth mentioning.
And I think, and we'll bring Matt in a second. It also, Pearl Harbor is not unique in that respect, but it's rare to have so much footage from the actual event. There were camera people there. There are other war films depicting battles that there was very little photos of, very little. So with Pearl Harbor, the public already had a strong visual idea of what happened because they had seen it for themselves. There were these genuine news of the Japanese were showing their propaganda films. So John Ford, his was the benchmark that all the others that followed were kind of measuring against that, and thus are fair to be judged in comparison to that. But we'll move into our first film. So our first film is From Here to Eternity. So it does cover Pearl Harbor, but as part of a typical 1950s kind of potboiler romance, and the Pearl Harbor sequence comes fairly towards the end of that film. What did we think of that? Let's go to Matt first.
Well, it's quite a good adaptation of the book, isn't it? It's got a strong cast. You've got Montgomery Clift and Burt Lancaster, and it's more of sort of a film that looks at army life in Hawaii at that period. And the author of the book it's based on had been in the division that was based on the island before the war. So we get all that sort of melodrama of day-to-day life, and there's a romance plot. And then finally at the end we get the attack on the harbour, and Burt Lancaster springs into action, grabs a BAR, gets to the nearest rooftop and lets rip. There we go. There he is. Got a BAR.
30 with a 30. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's got the M19 19A4 hip fire in it. Yeah, it's a good little sequence. It gives some good scale. In terms of how it's shot, it's quite good. There's lots of panning shots. The aircraft, it's quite authentic. It looks good. It's very brief though, so they could take that budget of whatever they had and then put it into that scene to give the film a climax that's befitting of everything it's led up to.
And it was filmed in the old 4:3 ratio, so they could cut in original footage without any kind of jarring, but enlarging. Like with Midway, which we're not talking about, the 76 version, you can clearly see the blown up 4:3 footage because it's all grainy because they've had to make it fit the widescreen. Yeah. With this, it all cuts in quite well. I mean, I'll bring Robbie in the same. My point is, I think because Burt Lancaster has in the film has been an adulterer. I mean, he was single, but he was having an affair with the captain's wife. Yeah. And I think part of having him then using the machine gun is kind of telling the audience, but be reassured he's a good plain American. He's a good old American. He shoots down aircraft as well. It's kind of reinforcing that although maybe he'd been part of breaking up a marriage, although the husband was bad, we're not going to talk about the romance side. It's kind of reinforcing who that character is. And so the attack on Pearl Harbor is part of the main story, even though you could kind of consider it a separate little bit of action to kind of bring the movie to an end. But Robbie, what were your thoughts?
I mean, I really enjoyed the bit you get at the end when they're attacked, because it's a different. Well, not necessarily different, but it's not as much of a naval depiction of the defense as some movies are. So for me, it was nice to see, lads breaking into the armory, getting all
the army side of things, isn't it?
Yeah, the small arms they could get and getting up on the rooftop and sticking it to those zeros. And it was, I just liked it, and I like the sort of the bravado, the 50s bravado of it. So when Burt Lancaster's rallying everyone, he grabs the cook and he's like, make some coffee. And then the guy goes to go away and he goes, no, make a barrel of coffee. I really like I just love those sort of pseudo action lines before that was really a thing. I liked it. It's a really tight, compact little sequence, and you still get the hard hitting of, because there's still men being shot and killed in that courtyard. And Burt Lancaster just gets to let rip. And he's a great lead.
He is, and in some ways, the film also establishes some of the Pearl Harbor tropes that appear in other movies. I mean, we talked with Drac on Monday about the fact the Imperial Japanese Navy didn't particularly strafe civilians. They've got limited time over Oahu. They're trying to get ships and they're trying to get targets. They weren't just indiscriminately going up and down between, up streets. But the movie has a little bit of that, which other movies have then used again, that idea of the kind of the bullets going down the streets and people scattering into buildings, which had happened a little bit in the battle. But I think that particular aspect of Pearl Harbor films was probably first seen in that, because it wasn't in the John Ford one, that kind of aspect of it. It was more the naval side of it. But I mean, we don't want to spend too long talking about this, because it is what it is. And although I just want to conclude about From Here to Eternity, is that at the time we must consider how racy that was, and the novel, of course, even more racy than what went on film. And of course, it led to Frank Sinatra's brilliant performance and Montgomery Clift, and there's a lot more nuance to the characters in the book. Homosexuality, prostitution, things like that come in that don't come into the slightly sanitized film. But for its day in 53, this was, the Deborah Carr, Burt Lancaster scene in the beach was kind of hot under the collar stuff. And but a great film. I enjoyed rewatching it. I have to say, although like all of the films, the recurring theme is how long it takes to get to the action scenes in a Pearl Harbor film. That, I think, is for future directors, kind of get to the action a bit sooner, maybe.
Is this the one that holds the title for taking the longest to get to the action, or would you say that's Tora Tora Tora?
Tora is an hour and
50. I think
30 until
before you get
over
the harbour.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of sort of in the film, this is the last 5 minutes of the film, isn't it? Really,
it's pushing it. Yeah.
But Lancaster's got some great lines in this. There's the bit where the one of the soldiers says, "Don't go outside, you'll get killed," and he's like, "Put your pants on, you'll catch cold." It's very 50s.
Yeah, it is. It's of its time, isn't it? So we can maybe refer back to some of these films later on when we make the comparisons. But I mean, we all know the two big ones we're going to be talking about are going to be Tora 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 and the Michael Bay Pearl Harbor. They're the two everyone's waiting to get our opinions on. But let's move on to the Japanese version. Of course, we will come to the fact the Japanese had a huge input in Tora Tora Tora, but Storm Over the Pacific, or as it was released in a cut-down version in the USA, I Bombed Pearl Harbor. And that's a Japanese poster of it. And then there's the American release poster. And you can just see, look at how they've chosen to have much more of the destruction of ships on the American poster than it's kind of gone behind the Japanese were making this much more like a typical 50s film about a group of people and friends, because to me, that's the difference about that film, is that you get to see the private lives of the pilots, and there's a mum character and a dad character, and there's a girlfriend who becomes a wife, and it's all a bit twee and nice, but no more twee and nice than all those 50s films like Battle Cry and the other ones that we love from that era that have those twee bits in them. But what are your thoughts on just kind of the whole sort of reason of the film? Then we'll get on to how it depicts Pearl Harbor in a second. Robbie?
I enjoyed it. It was all right. Yeah, it was nice to see the other side, and it was also nice to see the other side from an actual Japanese, not only filmmaking point of view, but from the story, like the storyline. It was just, it sometimes is useful and refreshing to look at things from the other side. So starting off here and then going from Tora Tora, it's nice to see there's a whole Japanese production, not just a working with. So I think it's quite healthy and interesting to see.
And Matt?
I liked it. I hadn't seen this actually until you invited us on, Paul, and I thought, well, I'll give this one a watch, and then I'll dive into Tora 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 and Final Countdown. I was putting off Pearl Harbor to the end, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting to get the Japanese perspective, as Rob said, and I thought that it handled it quite well. It's another film that tries to do Pearl Harbor and then Midway as sort of a joint effort, and there's 3 films that we're going to be talking about that do that. Trying to, I suppose that they bookend quite well. There's the beginning, and then Midway can be seen as a sort of turning point, an end point. But I know that you posted on Twitter, Paul, about the model work and how it was a little bit ropey in places, and I agree that there's only so many times you can watch a Zero go past the treetop and it shake a bit.
The string on the tree
like
bit.
6 times.
The guy who got that scene worked out obviously wanted that. Look, he's told the director, I've got this little bit where I'll pull on the string, and as the model goes over, you'll see it, and they overdo it. They do it 15
I know.
times.
There's one shot where the lighting changes, and it becomes very clear that you're just watching the same shot reshot several times.
Yeah,
but
I think there was someone with a hairdryer blowing that tree when they were coming over, because the wind comes in from a completely different direction.
We'll have to look at what the Japanese is for hairdryer, and then read the credits and see hairdryer operator is some guy on his film apprenticeship there. But
Yeah.
I mean, the model work is both good and at the same time it's both bad, because the problem it lacks is it has no human element. It literally looks like Revell and Airfix kits blowing up in a bathtub with paper mache. I'm making it worse than it is, but like paper mache mountains behind it. You get no sense of human peril. For all the brilliance of the model making, it doesn't have that human element in it at all. It is just you see kits blowing up as opposed to sensing that loss of life.
Well, there's no intercut. Sorry, Rob, go on.
No, you go.
There's no intercut reaction shots or anything like that. It's just a succession of shots of seeing these quite well made, but still clearly model ships getting destroyed. And the effects were supervised by E.G. Subaraya, who had done the King Kong movies, the Godzilla movies. Name any sort of monster movie from 50s, 60s Japanese cinema, and he was involved with it. And you can see it. I mean, the production value of it is good in terms of model work, and it's a big battle to kind of portray in model work when you think about it. It's a huge thing. There's 8 battleships and God knows what else is going on, and they do kind of get across some of the scale, but as you say, without those reaction shots and the human peril side of things, I think it undermines the rest of the sequences, where you get really nice performances from the Japanese actors, the pilots, the naval officers. You get the nuances of Japanese family life and the social sort of strata of everything. And then it concludes that sequence. It's a little bit... Well, the film begins with this sequence, doesn't it? This is probably like the earliest that Pearl Harbor occurs in a film. It's the first.
It gets into it pretty immediately, doesn't it? And of course, Toshiro Mifune, I don't know how you pronounce his name correctly, as Yamamoto. So probably going to be the best Yamamoto on screen, isn't it? I think.
He's great.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And the model work because they've obviously got real but not real in that the props spin. They've got full size Kates somewhere that can go down the carrier deck, but when they take off, it cuts the models, doesn't it? So they've obviously got taxiable replica aircraft, but didn't go the next, of actually making about to have them take off. So at times you think, oh, that's really good, then it cuts to something really not so good. But I think what's interesting
that tree though is quite good, isn't it? Where it blows.
Yeah, the tree work is good again. But going back to the American release of it, because a lot of people watching this are going to be in the USA, is that it does, as you said there, Matt, take us on to Midway. And the tonal shift in the movie is very obvious in that you get that we're going off for the glory of Japan at the beginning. It's all heroic. They're all kind of patting each other on the back, and they're celebrating with glee as they're destroying battleships in Battleship Row. But then when they go back, and a couple of them go back home to their girlfriends and wives and things like that, and it comes back and it explains what happened at Coral Sea. It explains with maps kind of the naval encounters that followed, and then Midway, as we know, goes wrong for them, and it ends really quite bleakly. So I think the American title doesn't really convey exactly what the movie is trying to say.
But it grabs you, doesn't it, though? Of course, it grabs you, yeah. It gets attention.
And I think they probably wanted people to go and see it, just to be angry with it. Americans going there, well, I'm going to see this, and I'm going to go shout at the screen all the way through. I don't know they were wanting people to go there with a sympathetic view to the Japanese. They wanted to bring them in by, we'll have to go and see that so we can go boo all the way through it. I don't know. But it's not a classic, and we won't spend much time talking about it, but it is, for those who feel the need to watch every Pearl Harbor portrayal on screen, you do get something out of it. It is interesting, and I think it reminds you that the Japanese were capable of making more movies where their home life and their interrelationships with their families were being shown, just like we Brits and Americans are as well, because that doesn't come across except in this film. But we'll move on to so before we move on from Pearl Harbor, what the hell are those American aircraft supposed to be? They are the dive bombers or torpedo, whatever they're supposed to be, that are moving in American towards Midway, and I have no idea what they're supposed to be.
Maybe they were like leftovers from a Godzilla movie.
I think that's it. I think they're leftovers from a Godzilla movie. They go, we need some more American
jets,
stuff.
don't they? They look like generic 50s jets.
Korean War Lockheed or
Yeah.
something.
There's
Sabres or
something
something like
dodgy
that.
about them. I don't know what they're supposed to be, but we'll leave that aside and talk about our next film, which has also come up in the sidebar, In Harm's Way, which is probably tying with I Bombed Pearl Harbor for the soonest that Pearl Harbor, the attack on Pearl Harbor comes in the movie. And opening thoughts about it, Robbie.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Pearl Harbor bits because it's from a different. As with oh, sorry, I've got my notes mixed up here. As with From Here to Eternity, it's a ground view of Pearl Harbor. You don't get a lot of it, but what you do see is people reacting to it, as opposed to a lot of cut-in stock footage from the newsreel and from 7th of December, which a lot of these black and white films take the liberty of doing. But it's nice to see. It's nice to see John Wayne and Kirk Douglas on the bridge reacting to it. It's nice to see the people on the beach and the people in Honolulu itself reacting. And I think for 65, it holds up still because it's a mixture of practical and miniature work. Yeah, I enjoyed it, and it is just nice to see that from the ground view, because sometimes I think when these productions get more bombastic, as we'll see later on, I think you can sometimes lose that personal touch of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I think. Yeah.
And Matt, opening thoughts?
I liked it. I thought I really enjoyed John Wayne's performance. It was subdued, a little bit more understated than some of his other war movies, and I think that's largely because he wasn't too well at the time. He had cancer, didn't he? And I love Kirk Douglas. I always enjoy his films, and I thought he was very good in this as quite a complex naval officer. He's aviation trained, back on as a deck officer. Later on, there's a scene where he rapes a nurse, and that's quite brave for a mid-60s film. It's a complicated story that it's trying to tell. And he has a bit of a redemption arc, but he's not a character that you would. He's a bit of an anti-hero in that respect.
Yeah,
but in terms of the actual.
Sorry, it allows Kirk Douglas to show that darker side that he could do in some movies when he's not just playing the conventional leading man. Even like in Gunfight at OK Corral, when he plays Doc Holliday, he sort of allows his darker side to come through. And but Scott Grimwood said that the Destroyer Cassidy sequences, and that I think it's the only one that kind of shows ships leaving Pearl Harbor and getting out.
Where the captain's trying to get on board off a launch, and the young junior grade lieutenant just goes, "No, we're going," which is the right choice. And I like that. I thought the scale of what they achieved in that sequence, the actual attack, the battle, was quite good. You get real ships that don't look too modern. You get some nice tight sequences. You see a number of different perspectives from the Navy's point of view, and it's, as Rob said, it's a ground view, it's a Navy view, it's sea level, let's say. It's all really nicely shot by Loyal Griggs, who was an Oscar winner, won an Oscar for Shane, I think it was. So it's very competently made, and I like the fact that it mentions the USS Ward, which pops up again in a couple of the other films, and it's an enjoyable one. Oh, and you get to see Carol Connor, General Colt from Kelly's Heroes. He's the XO, isn't he, on the cruiser?
And as someone said, Dana Andrews plays a heel again. He was going through an alcoholic period of his career. He was in Battle of the Bulge the same year, playing a heel as well. And he'd been the lead in the films in the 40s. He was in Purple Heart and what have you. But he was career was coming towards an end there. But the elephant in the room within harm's way, well, the two elephants in the room, of course, is the rape sequence, which is, as you said, Matt, by today's standard, it's fairly brutal, but by 65 standards, it was really, really, especially because the actress is so young. She'd been made Exodus with Paul Newman and even Marie Saint.
It's Kirk Douglas. You wouldn't expect him to play that role.
Yeah, and it happens really suddenly. You don't really see it coming. It goes light-hearted, then it gets very, very dark, very, very quickly. And for those who haven't seen it, it goes to a very dark bit. I mean, he does have a kind of redemption as a military officer, but he doesn't have a redemption as a human being. He's a rapist, so we don't care what happens. But the other elephant in the room is why they decided to fictionalize all the battles post post Pearl Harbor. None of the, although it's clearly kind of implying Coral Sea, implying Guadalcanal, New Guinea, maybe they make up the names of these islands, they make up fleet commanders, they make up this. And I tried to find out, I looked in my books, why they chose to not follow real battles, and I can't find an answer. So what did you feel about that? You know, that John Wayne is literally talking about these places with it's like someone's made up an island name by throwing Scrabble letters at a table, and they've just drawn a wiggly island on the thing there. And it's like, why did they make that decision? What's your thought on that, Robbie?
I mean, perhaps they didn't want to besmirch the actual events, perhaps. But even if you keep it fictionalized, then you have more carte blanche to do what you feel like you can get away with, rather than if you say it's Coral Sea and you're in 1965. It's only 15 years after the fact, so you know possibly you've got more people to annoy if you get it wrong. I mean, maybe that's what they were going for. Yeah,
and that's what I do for the boil a little bit there, doesn't it? It's sort of, it just goes off into, well, it's fiction obviously, but it's interesting. Once you pass the Pearl Harbor section of the movie, and there's some repercussions of that. John Wayne's character's essentially, you know, thrown up on shore and is removed from command of his cruiser. But yeah, it's a bit weird. I don't know. As Rob said, perhaps it's just avoiding getting things wrong. Perhaps it's a historical accuracy, and they didn't want to
can I
try
remind
and
you,
tell too much.
Coming out in the same year as Battle of the Bulge. So if if Hollywood is worried about getting historical battles wrong, they didn't kind of,
maybe they'd seen some rushes
they
of the Battle of the Bulge.
Bookend it with Midway, and they thought, well, we'll just make some stuff up that we can have a nice bookend for the end of the film, where Kirk Douglas flies off and spots the Japanese, etc.
Maybe. I mean, and Scott makes the point there that Henry Fonda is in all essence playing Nimitz for the first time, that he would then play in Midway 11 years later. I mean, he's not named as Nimitz, but clearly that's kind of who he's supposed to be. And if you know a bit about the Pacific history, you can kind of see these parallels between some of the characters and some real people. The PT commanders kind of have some parallels there, because there's kind of even a JFK subliminal reference in there with some of those people there. So it's trying to get a lot in. But another thing I want to mention there we just had there is how bad the sea battle at the end is. The final battle is models again, isn't it? And it just it's a really poor finale to the movie. It kind of ends. It's
everything the beginning isn't it? Really?
Exactly. Yeah, it's like they ran out of budget. Yeah, all the budget had gone on getting the destroyer out of Pearl Harbor, which probably was filmed on location. I assume it was. And then the last sequence is kind of models again, and it's like, well, made for the last few dollars they had left, possibly. I don't know, but yeah, it's an interesting movie, and I watched it not long ago. It's what kind of prompted me to do this. And I realized I hadn't seen it for maybe 20 years, and I had forgotten whole chunks of it, and I kind of enjoyed just revisiting it. But it's an odd one. It doesn't its whole tonal, what it's trying to do, it's a bit, falls between different categories and genres for me a bit, but interesting nevertheless. But we're moving on to our next kind of big one, Tora, which again, a Japanese and American view of the same event, and all sorts of big names involved in the development of this beyond Daryl Zanuck, but Kurosawa, who ended up dropping out, and two other directors came in for the Japanese side. And so there's one poster of it, and there's another poster of it, and it got various re-releases and 70mm Cinerama versions and what have you. And there's now the long extended Japanese version that's available on Blu-ray and DVD. But opening thoughts about Tora, Robbie?
It was very much a movie of two halves, isn't it? I think, and that intermission is, I mean, thank God for it, because I was losing interest, because it's so straight down the line. There's no subplots. There's no one else in that movie who isn't needed to be in it 100%.
Yeah.
But for its runtime, I actually think in places it felt longer than Pearl Harbor did. But that's maybe just film editing isn't what it is in 1970, is what it is in 2001, and it's not how Bay makes a film anyway. We'll get onto that. But when the actual Pearl Harbor attack starts, I've said it before, it's a fantastic blend of miniature work and practical effects. And you actually get the reaction of sailors, you get them fighting fires, you get them doing air defense, and you get to see the attack on the airfields as well. And it is what it is. It's a big epic blockbuster from 1970, and it's great. It's really good. I wish the first half was maybe just trimmed down just a tad, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's have Matt's opening thoughts.
Yeah, it's an hour and 50 before we get to the actual battle, and there's a huge number of characters that they have to introduce, and the effort to be historically accurate is commendable. But I think an offshoot of that is they do have an awful lot to do. In that they're trying to introduce these characters and define them, and then also make sure that they're telling the story still and it's still moving along. And in some points they do it really well, and in others it's a little bit slow. And again, you mentioned Zanuck there. He produced The Longest Day, didn't he? And again, this is the approach he wanted to make a big epic that brought in a number of professionals that were, top of their game, sort of thing, Kurosawa, etc., and Wheeler, and take two approaches to it, which is admirable, and I like it, and I think it's an interesting way of making the film. But maybe in some of the sequences where it's edited together, it's too many cooks, spoil the broth, sort of thing. But the actual sequence itself is, I think, the probably the best depiction of Pearl Harbor, because, as Rob said, you get the practical effects, the miniatures, the reaction shots are great. It shows you nuances of men on the ground fighting fires, manning anti-aircraft positions, and then aboard ships you get sequences of damage control and the repercussions of being struck by ordnance, which a lot of the films kind of, especially the latter two, so Midway and Pearl Harbor, the impact of ordnance becomes sort of like fetishized, where it's like in Pearl Harbor, there's a number of scenes where they're just looking at bombs waiting for them to explode, and it becomes kind of too much. But I think with this movie, it makes that effort to be historically accurate, but then it also gives you a really interesting presentation of what it might have looked like on the ground, and it's focused mostly on the attack, and there isn't as much strafing as is mentioned in other films or shown in other films. So I liked it. I think it's possibly my favorite out of the major ones.
I think I agree with you. Overall, it's the best of the bunch, but I have some problems with it, and there's some things we will spend longer, folks, talking about this one because I think it deserves it. I mean, the first thing is that I was watching the documentary that accompanied, or the History Uncovered, or Hollywood Uncovered of his documentaries on the Blu-ray this afternoon, and they were saying how they chose to use sort of a lesser tier of character actors because they would be more of a docudrama. I think it's because they were cheaper. I think it's because they spent their money converting all those aircraft and getting all the hire of the ships, and they couldn't afford you to fill it with Charlton Hestons and Charlie Bronsons, all those kind of people that could have been in it. And some of the actors at the beginning, they're all a little bit earnest, maybe a little bit too kind of theatre, a bit too, I don't know.
I know what you mean.
The delivery is a little bit weird.
Scenes.
I mean, I think maybe it's because they're trying to go for this, the documentary feel to it and what have you. I mean, the best character in it, I think, is Halsey, played by James Whitmore from Baston, and of course later on in that wonderful role in Shawshank Redemption. I think he's the one who gives it the most. And perhaps Neville Brand, who was the Lieutenant Kaminsky, the guy who says, "There's your proof," the kind of chubby guy who
that's great.
Who was billed as when he started his acting career after World War II, was billed as the third most decorated soldier in World War II, like 2 after Audie Murphy. He was decorated, but he wasn't anywhere near the third most decorated. But he was a World War II veteran. He had been out there in one of the infantry divisions, I believe, but he kind of gave it a gravitas of someone who was actually in the war. But those early sequences it does take a long time. I mean, it is historically accurate, most of it. I think everybody watching this won't be able to find many holes with it in terms of how it depicts the Japanese political side of things, the roles of the ambassadors, the George Marshall, the embassy officials. All that is very good, but it takes a long time.
It wasn't a success when it came out, really, in America. It kind of bombed, and Roger Ebert described it as one of the deadest, dullest blockbusters ever made.
Yeah. He's very scathing of it.
I mean, obviously, he really didn't enjoy that first 2/3, 3/4 of the movie, I guess.
Yeah.
But as Robbie said, there's no subplot. It's very straight down the line.
I mean, you two, you run a war film podcast. I talk about history. We all talk about history. We're looking at it, and we're noticing the historical details. And so I'm sure reviewers in 1970 were looking at it purely from how is it reaching people on the cinema screen. They're not necessarily looking at it from that historical accuracy point of view. I mean, one of the points that occurred to me this afternoon rewatching it is that I think, kind of possibly slightly controversial opinion here, it's possibly the first of the 1970s what they began calling the paranoia thrillers, the Clute and executive action and the parallax view, those kind of things where they're saying that the government is behind everything. Everything has got people plotting behind it. Executive action was the one with Burt Lancaster, again, interestingly, about the JFK assassination. And I think, I don't know that it's ever been described as that, but I think there's definitely that first hour, there's a sense that there's like some kind of puppet master behind the scenes manipulating the events to make it so that telegrams don't get through and messages. That's something I'm reading into it, because I just went through a phase recently of watching those 70s paranoia thrillers, and I just saw this connection of this suspicion of government maybe as a theme.
There's a literal scene in the film where the naval officer and the army officer, I think he's a major general, are in the ultra decryption office, and the naval officer opens up a cupboard, which is weird, but okay. They open up a cupboard and it swings open the doors, and it's got a list of everyone who's allowed to know about ultra and the decryption process and the intercepts. And there's a scene where they cross off the president's name, and like we had a back and forth, and one of the intercepts was found in a rubbish bin in the White House, and we can't let the White House staff have them anymore because it's not great for security. This is top secret stuff. We're intercepting Japanese communications, and the fewer people know about that, the better. And there's less than half a dozen names on the board at that point. Yeah,
and I think you're right. I really appreciated just the sense of scale as well for 1970, where Pearl Harbor, we'll come on to it, but where Pearl Harbor can just spend lots of money at CGI. This movie spends 25 million. Getting models of ships, making mock-up Zeros, getting Kitty Hawks, and getting planes to fly in over Pearl Harbor as well, and then editing it up to look bigger than it is. I really love that. The sense of scale is fantastic. It's it is like The Longest Day, where it gets its scale right. And
I mean, look at those P-40s.
Exactly.
They're amazing.
Looks brilliant.
They're all one-to-one scale models that were made. Some of them could actually move, so they look like they were taxiing.
Yeah.
It's just incredible.
And they had two that flies. I think as you said, Robbie said, I think they were Kitty Hawk Model J's made up to look like P-40 Model B's. But I don't want to kind of preempt I know it's going to be one of my more controversial things I'm going to say when we get to Pearl Harbor later on. But I will say now, there's a lot of emphasis in this film in the P-40s. I think someone behind it, whether it's Richard Fleischer, the director, or someone, really liked the P-40 angle. And I think, if I'm being really critical of it, they spend a little bit too much time on the P-40s and a little bit less time on Battleship Row. That would be where I would say.
The reason for that is that one of the pilots that did get airborne in a P-40 was a historical advisor on the film.
Ah, right, yeah.
Lieutenant or Lieutenant Taylor was one of the P-40 pilots that managed to get airborne and shoot down one or two Zeros or attacking planes. And he was depicted in the film by, I think it's, let me check my notes, Carl Raindl. And you do see them get airborne and get into the planes and take off, and they do have a bit of a dogfight. So I think perhaps the fact that he was one of the historical advisors on the film, or at least the American side of the film, lent into that P-40 perhaps bias, as you say, Paul.
I mean, that's a good. I've left that screen grab on there because that's an unofficial attempt at replicating one of the Medal of Honor recipients, Finn, who is going to be covered in the show on Friday with Charles Jones, my presenter that day. So that's a genuine action there. That is one of the the Medal of Honor recipients that day, and it does include, if you know the battle.
Yeah, Dory Miller's in there as well.
There
isn't
are
he?
lots of kind of cameos of real events in it. If you know that they're not. A modern film would make the point of introducing all the characters, telling you exactly what's happening, and hammering home that this is a real incident, folks. But with this, there's an expectancy that the audience are intelligent enough, if they've read some of these books, to spot some of these scenes. You know, for example, that scene there. I mean, Dory Miller isn't mentioned by name, yet he's in it. Then you see the cook run out there and grab a machine gun. So there's quite a lot of things they throw in that they don't make a big point over, and I like it for that reason.
I like that as well. I like the. I don't know if they meant to keep it in or not, but when that chap is letting loose with that AA gun there, that bomber, I think it's a bomber or a I don't know what plane it is behind him, but that goes up, and he looks at the pyrotechnic that goes off, and if that's meant to be kept in or not. But I really like there's this sense of realism and sense of sort of urgency to the sailors when they start off running around the ships and they're trying to get to their AA guns and things. That sense of urgency and that sense of, oh my God, what's going on? That felt really real. And because I don't think there's any direction perhaps on those sequences as much for the extras. So they are reacting as they go. There's a sequence where some chaps are trying to get out a hose and one of them lets go and the hose is just flailing, but he's trying to put out a fire that's next to him. I really like those scenes, and I don't think there's when they are in
realism, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, one of the P-40 taxiing that crashes was unscripted. Something went wrong with it, didn't it?
Right.
And that they've kept it in because we know now that with the money spent on films, everything is choreographed to within a millimeter. Everything is on lines and drags, so things stop and explosions will stop there and they will end there. We know that back in the 60s and 70s, although we're not saying they weren't safe back then, movies, but they were slightly more kind of allowing things to unfold on screen and assuming that the extras and the people involved would just kind of move out the way if they had to, and camera people would swing the camera around and pick up things that were happening. We know that let's talk about, we'll talk about Midway later on, but with that, everything is going to be absolutely planned to the perfection in advance and storyboarded, and no allowance for anything to go wrong. With this, you do get a sense that there's just someone saying, right, trucks start running now, and everyone's just kind of doing stuff, and there's people just filming what they get.
Yeah. Well, with films on this sort of scale, it's difficult to reset for scenes as well, isn't it? Back then, especially when things weren't replaceable. You might be able to blow up half a dozen P-40s in one shot, but you couldn't repeat that again.
No, exactly.
So I think, incidentally, this image you got up here, Paul, I think it's one of the quintessential sort of visual iconography moments of Pearl Harbor, isn't it? That sandbag emplacement, things exploding all around, hangars being damaged, and that brave individual just manning a 50 cal. And that gets repeated again. You see that again in all the subsequent films that follow this one.
I think, Robbie, you've got a copy of that big kind of A3 size spiral bound 70s war movie book, haven't you? I know I have it. It's where I got all my posters. It kind of folds out with the posters, and that image was the back cover of that. So there's a
I know the one you mean.
It's the back cover of that. So that image was one of the lobby cards. It was one of the ones they would have had up. We forget that these days, folks, is when you went to the cinema, your first impression of the movie, you may have seen the trailer when you saw another film before, and then you went in there, and as you're lining up to get your popcorn or your hot dogs or your wine gums, or it would be, there'd be those lobby cards there on the side there. And this would have been one of the images that would have resonated with people. Now we've seen all the PR stuff before a movie comes out. We've seen documentaries. We've seen the actors interviewed on set. This is an era when you kind of went there. You went into the theater a little bit more blindly, and that would have been an image that was very powerful.
I also, before we move on, I also really like that you get to see the crew of the B-17 flying through it, and you get their experience. None of the other films do that, and I wasn't expecting it, and it was really good. And there's some good humor in there as well. We're flying into a war. Trust us, we're unarmed. We don't have any weapons to fight back with, and I really enjoyed that because I wasn't expecting to see anything like that in it. I mean, I don't know if that actually happened. I'm not massively 100%.
I think it did. I think so. Yeah, I think that is how it was. I mean, my last comment, and I'll let you say anything else you want to say about before we move on to Pearl Harbor, is I think the director, the screenplay towards the end is trying to elicit the audience sympathy to the wrong people. The bit when the bullet comes through the window, true story, and General Admiral Kimmel is there, and he's like, it would have been merciful if it killed me. And then they're looking at, I think they're trying to make you sympathetic, with sympathy towards these generals and admirals and officers. And I don't know that they're making you feel sympathetic about those 1,000 guys who are in Arizona going down and things like that. I think they're misplacing the audience's emotional connection towards the end there. That's what do you feel about that, guys?
See, I felt differently. I felt that the movie was trying to not perhaps lay blame, but maybe just lay some inadequacies in the preparation and the planning and the reasons why it went the way it did. So when that bullet comes through, I don't know if it's the actor way to choose portrayal, but he's sort of like, oh, I wish it had hit me. I wish that bullet had got me. That'd be like some relief. And I felt, it's not entirely that admiral's fault that Pearl Harbor happened. They didn't heed some warnings, perhaps, but I think maybe the movie's laying blame where it doesn't really need to, because it didn't beforehand, and it does for about 5 minutes after, especially when they go into the room there and they look over the harbor, and the chap's like, there's your confirmation. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's a beautifully shot sequence. It's fantastic. The line is really great, but do we need to? Yeah, no, I agree with that comment you just put up there. Actually,
yeah, no, I do agree with that. Again, it's that level of expectancy it's putting on the audience, that they're assuming some of the fates of these people. It assumes you'll know what the character arc of some of these people were beyond the movie. And I guess, of course, we are talking 1970. There's going to be lots of people going to see that movie who were maybe there or were certainly in the Navy and the Army. They're only in their 50s and 60s then. It's not that long. It's 35 years after the war or something. So that that it's that they're allowing the audience to fill in those gaps. That's a different thing when you do on your podcast. That modern movies give you everything. There's no need for you to go to a movie and have any needs to have any prior knowledge. They give everything to you on a plate.
Well, classically, that's what 2019's Midway does, isn't it? It spoon feeds you all of the major characters.
All the information you need to know, all the character development is all given to you in a, as you say, spoon fed in little pre. We'll get to that film later on, of course. Yeah, but you're right. But Tora. I mean,
it's revisionist. I think when you consider it, I think it's revisionist in that it tries not to place all of the blame on the Navy. There's a lot of the whole signals intelligence stuff comes into it, and it's what from this point onwards a lot of the films try and touch on or deal with where the blame lay, and that's something that initially evolved a fair bit, and Kimmel was obviously scapegoated for that, and blame obviously did lie with him because the book stops somewhere, doesn't it?
Exactly.
But I think
we talked about that on Monday, and folks, if you haven't seen the show on Monday with Drac and Eiffel, we talk about the fate of Admiral Kimmel and General Short and what happened to them. And someone just said that their families, they think, are still trying to get their names cleared, which is 80 years later is quite amazing. The last thing I said my last thing, but my last thing about Tora.
We'll come back to Tora.
I read some negative reviews saying it's too sympathetic to the Japanese, and I think the word I would use is it does give a multi-dimensional view of the Japanese. Layered, I think, is the word I would use rather than sympathetic. I mean, that the ambassador at the end there, when he's called out by Henry Harlan, it said, you gave it to us, and never have I in my 50 years of service have I seen such a underhand whatever he says, and the Japanese actor, you do feel a bit sorry for him because you know that real character is a pawn. You know that those Japanese were hung out to dry by the Japanese Navy out there back in Tokyo. They were tricked into pretending, but I don't know that sympathetic is the word I'd use. I said it's giving them a more, unlike when we talked about I Bombed Pearl Harbor, where the Japanese chose not to show any American reaction whatsoever.
Yeah.
This is trying to show everybody's interpretation of it. It's showing you the pilots jumping into their aircraft, going off kind of with excitement. It's showing them pleased they're hitting their targets, but it is also showing them as, Yamamoto and some of the other Japanese politicians. It's giving them there are debates about whether or not this is the right thing to do. I think multi-layered is a better word than sympathetic. What do you guys think on that before we move on to Pearl Harbor?
I'd go for that. I didn't feel any sort of overarching emotion at the end. I think everyone was. I think it was presented to you quite fairly. Really, I didn't feel anything towards any particular set of people. I think what it did do is it did it kind of fairly. I didn't really,
I think what's gone on there. Sorry, Rob.
Go on.
I think what's gone on there is that they've perceived an attempt to be balanced and revisionist as being a little bit too sympathetic towards the Japanese point of view, perhaps, and they aren't used to seeing a depiction of the enemy quite so balanced. There are a number of films that attempted to show the two sides of the war, some on a really personal level, some on a more grand scale. But yeah, I think perhaps they've understood that the depiction of the Japanese and their point of view it offers a little bit more bias. But then you have to consider that the first half of Tora is showing the Japanese preparation.
Yep.
And the Americans aren't really doing a great deal because they're not expecting anything. Exactly. You get the singles intelligence stuff, but on the ground, it's, this is our new radar. We need to put it on that hill, but the Park Service won't let us put it on that hill. And then, but meanwhile, you've got some very stoic, darkly shot, moody discussions in Japanese Navy ministry. And there's that sequence of the throne room where they go and see the emperor and that sort of thing. So it's probably just a balance thing.
And Ian Carr's point there about the fact that maybe is why it didn't work, because in that era, movies are made for the nation, generally for the nation that makes them. So the British are making British war films for the British audience. The Americans are making American movies for the American audience, and the Japanese, and so on and so forth. This is clearly meant to be an international film that everybody will get something else. So therefore, it's not quite pleasing each nation fully, because the Japanese were disappointed with it as well. They said it didn't show enough. And so it was trying to be a bit of a curate's egg in that, so trying to please everybody, and in a sense, kind of not finding its place at the time. But of course, as we're basically agreeing, as we look at it now with the benefit of another 50 years since the movie came out, it is a very balanced, accurate, broadly accurate version of the event. And it's probably going to come out the best of the bunch we've seen.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree. Are we going to agree on that now?
I think so. Yeah.
It's the one that seems to try and make the most efforts to show not only a balanced and nuanced approach to the battle, but it also depicts it probably the best, I think, in terms of cinematography. Yeah.
But now we have it up on screen, folks. Here's the one you've all been waiting for. What we think about the Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett, Kate Beckinsale, Michael Bay epic from 20 years ago, Pearl Harbor, and this is where I think people are going to find some of the stuff. We're going to see the viewing numbers drop, because I'll start. I'll take the first salvo. It wasn't anything like as bad as I remembered it. I hadn't seen it for maybe a decade. I sat with Mag and we watched it on Saturday. And as a piece of entertainment, I'm going to say it now, I pretty much enjoyed it as a piece of entertainment. And then we'll take it apart later. But first reaction, Robbie.
I've written it in my notes. 8-year-old me loved it. 28-year-old me only loves a bit of it.
Yeah, Matt.
No, I still hate it. Yeah, no, I just didn't enjoy it. It's too overblown. It's too Michael Bay. I can understand it as a piece of cinema and popcorn culture. You sit down for the big blockbuster and you enjoy it. It has its redeeming features, though. I will grant that. Certainly, especially compared with Midway 2019. The CGI is much more restrained because it's a newer technology. They aren't overdoing it so much. So I think in that respect, the scenes of the actual attack on Battleship Row, etc., are perhaps a little bit better than what you get in Midway. You would hope that, considering Midway isn't really supposed to be telling the story of Pearl Harbor, although it does have a good crack at it. But I do think I still can't get along with it. There's something about it. the characters I don't gel with.
I'm completely on board with all of that. Yeah, and I will modify my statement in a second because I'm already getting people saying they're going to unsubscribe to me, and I've probably got death threats coming in the post right now. I'll quantify it by saying, if we're doing this in the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, we are talking about the depiction of Pearl Harbor on screen, okay? And all my problems with the movie are everything else except the actual attack on Pearl Harbor sequence. If you take that section out, I think, and particularly here's where I think, I'm hoping people will agree with me, the plight of the people on board the ships in Battleship Row has never been portrayed better than in Pearl Harbor. I know it's a bit cheesy, but the sequence when Ben Affleck is there and why is he helping rescue? He's been flying. I know that's all ridiculous, but
the hands coming through the deck plate,
the hands coming out through the hull, that is incredibly moving. The water coming in the decks there, the people trying to get out, that the those that are drowning, the dying in the flames there. In terms of that, and that alone is why I think it has it's worth redeeming, because it is, in terms of this sequence that's on screen now, it is the best depiction of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Because in terms of the Battleship Row bit, we agree that Tora does the P-40s and the aircraft action and all the flying of the Zeros and the Kates and stuff maybe better. But the plight of the men on Arizona and California and what have you, I think that's where it redeems itself. Now we can fully tear apart the rest of it. But
my problem is with it.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I do agree that 40-minute section in the middle is probably one of the better pieces of filmmaking Michael Bay's ever done, and that's not saying much.
It's a low benchmark. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, but my big issue with the movie is, and this is me revising my initial thoughts of when I was 8 years old. I know exactly when I used to fast forward the videotape, and it was directly after the bar brawl, because I knew that's where the cool bits happened, or bits I enjoyed about, the war movie bits in your war movie start. But my big issues with it, Ben Affleck and Josh Hartnett, even for 2001, even looking back at their careers, they are nowhere near leading men ready for this movie. The two characters just don't make sense, because he's going on about,
also
I want to be a hero.
dull.
Yeah, he's like, I want to be a hero. I want to matter. And they always speak in like cliche, or they speak in poetic rubbish. But aren't you meant to be like two bumpkin farmhand boys from the middle of nowhere? Why are you suddenly like got a degree in like philosophy and can talk like all this? There's just so many beats of the movie that either just don't make sense or are just plugged in to sort of pull at heartstrings. And I'm like, well, I don't care enough about these two guys. They're not likable as people. Danny jumps in and tries to.
It is tropey.
Yeah, it's very tropey. Yeah, and then,
definitely. And I think the people who think I was laying on a lot of love for Pearl Harbor are going to keep with us, because I'm now going to tear apart all the parts of it I don't like. But
before you do, Woody, let me say that I appreciated the representation of a dyslexic pilot. As a dyslexic myself, I appreciate that dyslexic representation on screen. As ludicrous as that is, I did appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, if we talk, I'll go back to these images in a minute. But if we're talking about depictions, let's talk about how brilliant a character Kate Beckinsale's nurse is, and how she is as heroic as the two leads. In fact, arguably more so. We can say that maybe there weren't as that many attacks on hospitals, and some of the stuff is a bit overblown and what have you, and Betty being killed in the. But that that panic there, what they're doing there, the triage. Is brilliant. It's brilliantly done. Someone said that about they're showing. Oh, Scott Grimwood said the aftermath they're showing there. For a Michael Bay early 2000s epic, when girls in movies were still of the screaming kind of old-fashioned James Bond heroine kind of thing, where they need to be rescued. Kate Beckinsale is a really good kick-ass character that would be a strong character today in 2021, but in 2001. Really kind of ahead of the game. So, and also, of course, can we just agree she's just absolutely gorgeous? And if you're watching Kate, give us a. No, I'm joking.
That whole sequence where the exposure changes and they're in the hospital, and it's everyone who's been trained up for this moment who isn't ready for it, completely mirrors the men on the ships. Yeah. So it's the civilian aspect of it, and when she's saying to that young doctor, what do you need? What do you want me to do? It's showing that how everyone is coming together in this one climactic moment in history, and everyone's having their moment to shine and do something, but then it ruins it 10 minutes later, where you get that horrible, I don't even know if it happened, I'm not even sure, I tried to research it, but you get that horrible ham-fisted Coca-Cola product placement with when the blood goes into the bottles that just drags you out of it again, and you're reminded that you're watching a TV.
I'm sure they might have grabbed those kind of bottles, or soda bottles.
Yeah, but it's so obvious.
But yeah, the fact that the Coke imprint on the bottle is perfectly lined up in shot. Then
I hadn't noticed that. Yeah, no, that's you're right. That
Ben Affleck might as well come to the camera and go, "Coca-Cola, the lifeblood of the U.S. Air Force." It's like that is. Come on, it's too much.
I mean, and this is why this is going to be the film we're going to spend the longest about, because it has these moments where you think, if it was more like this, it would be brilliant. And if you take away all this, you could take it. It's too many different things going on there. And
well, jumping off that point, Woody, I think if you consider that Tora was made by 4 directors, if you include Kurosawa, that feels a more coherent film than Pearl Harbor does in stylistic approach.
Definitely,
because Bay is all over the place in this. There's some really great shots, really great sequences. As we've said, Kate Beckinsale's character and all of the female nurse characters are all quite well rounded. They're all individual. They all have defined characteristics. They talk to each other about things other than men, and that's a big tick for 2001. I mean, you don't get that in many films now still.
Exactly.
But there's other places where it's very patchy and it's just a bit cringe.
Yeah. No, agreed. I mean, but while we've got those images up on screen of the actual destruction on Battleship Row, I mean, I defy anybody to say that isn't incredibly well done, to the point that it's almost still difficult to watch. It's because
it is.
You are feeling at that point, even though it's all overblown elsewhere, this isn't overblown. I mean, battleships were rolling on their sides and going down, and thousands were dying. I mean, this isn't a Star Wars film where we're seeing space freighters blow up and it's all imaginary death. This is real death we're seeing on screen. And where Tora gave a few more too many Toras there, is focusing all that P-40 stuff. This takes you and spends time there watching the plight, as I said earlier, of those guys dying on those ships. And then, as people have said, the hospital aftermath that Tora doesn't have time to do. Midway does. When we get to Midway, of course, Midway does have identifying remains and things, which is we'll get onto that later on. The other thing about Pearl Harbor is the runtime and how many battles it tries to fit in to that running time. And the Battle of Britain, as 3 Brits here, we'll just talk about the Battle of Britain. It's not the flying. I have no problem with the flying. I think the flying is pretty well done. It's the fact that the Brits keep telling Ben Affleck in a kind of a Dick Van Dyke kind of, oh, it's so good you, Mr. Yank, coming over here and winning the Battle of Britain for us, which actually the Battle of Britain has ended 6 months earlier. So what are they meant to be depicting? But that is so cringeworthy when they're thanking, oh, it's so grateful you've come over here, Governor. And,
there's that bit where the squadron commander comes over and goes, I wish, if all Americans are like you, then I wish more of you were involved in the war.
I think as well that it's an issue when the movie comes out, because in the middle of 2001, we're in that renaissance of war movies where we've had Saving Private Ryan, we're going to have We Were Soldiers, we have Black Hawk Down the same year. So we're in that glut of renaissance, sort of late 90s, early 2000s American war movie renaissance. So I can get why they're sort of playing off the British aspect, but it's weird. It's not needed. It's just another sequence where I'm like, why are you showing Affleck going and trying to make him a war hero, but then show us a crash that I doubt he could survive, and even if he did, he would be brutally wounded.
The wrong market Spitfire as well.
That just literally came up on the sidebar as you said that, Matt. By about 3 years or something. Yeah,
it's so weird.
And they're all marked up as Polish 303 Squadron as well.
Yeah.
We've all got
and where is that airfield? Downton Abbey. I'm like, where's that meant to be?
It is a bit, Downton Abbey goes to war. Yeah.
I mean,
it's that Michael Bay is for dialogue what George Lucas is for dialogue, isn't it? He can handle the action quite well, but actually his character dialogue is unrealistic and cliche ridden. I don't know who actually did the script on it, because he was producer.
It was Randall Wallace, the same man who wrote Braveheart.
Oh, so well, there you are then. Again, great spectacle, but the dialogue is mostly pants in that. Except Patrick McGuire, I think, wrote his own lines for Braveheart, which makes sense because he's the best in that. But that's another discussion of the day. But yeah, the Battle of Britain sequence, and just, let's not go into the historical accuracy of him being in the Army Air Corps, then joining the Eagle Squadron, then coming out of the Eagle Squadron, and going back into the Army Air Corps, and then the two of them within a few weekends going from being P-40 pilots to being bomber pilots and joining Alec Baldwin as Jimmy
USAF, like, isn't it?
Oh wow,
he can do everything.
Okay. Wow.
That's what I got in my notes.
The best Doolittle is Erin Eckhart in Midway a better Doolittle than Baldwin?
Well,
because Baldwin's just doing Glen Ross acting in this one.
Yeah. Well, this came up on the show I did with James M. Scott about the Doolittle raid. Is that when anyone's trying to play Nimitz in a film, which we've seen several times, we mentioned Henry Fonda, Woody Harrelson in Midway. Everyone knows you're going to have the silver hair, and people know what Nimitz looks like. I don't know that most people could actually kind of pick Jimmy Doolittle up out of a lineup. So I don't think they feel the need, movie makers, to actually bring in, because he was bald as a coot like me. So Alec Baldwin is clearly not bald as a coot. I don't think with Doolittle people really care what he looks like. It's the name that stands for something more than the look.
It doesn't help again that he just talks in this poetic, weird, cliche language. Everyone who's brave, step forward. I'm like, oh, for God's sake, do we have to have this yet again? My favorite character is Tom Sizemore, because at least he is portraying an action. He's an action.
Well, he's playing Tom Sizemore, isn't he? He's
playing Tom Sizemore, yeah. But at least he's doing it. At least he's not, and I love the PG-13 replacing the F word for suckers and all that. I quite like that sequence. He's my favorite character in it, Tom Sizemore, just because he's unashamedly what he is in that movie. He's not trying to be some weird sort of middleman.
He's the kind of man that has a shotgun on his motorcycle.
Yeah,
that's what he is.
And Cuba Gooding Jr. It gets some horrible lines, but at least he gets an arc.
Sort of. I mean, we can question the fact that whether an African American naval enlisted rank would be allowed to be in the same building on his own with a officer, nurse, and all those kind of things, and how he manages to have a dialogue with the captain 3 times. And you think, I don't know exactly how battleships work, but I don't think captains have many times to have conversations with the mess. I don't know. But I'm glad he's in it, and I've read a couple of reviews recently saying that he should have been the central character, and if it had been about him, it might have been a better movie.
He does a lot with the tiny amount he's given, to be honest.
Yeah,
he actually looks like he's trying to add some depth to his character rather than just being an action hero with heartthrob, and that's what Affleck and Hartnett are doing.
Yeah,
at least, I think, is this before he wins his Oscar or just after? I can't remember.
Before, I would think.
Yeah, but he's really great in it. I wish there was more. When I rewatched it a few days ago, I was like, okay, can I see more Cuba Gooding now? And then you don't, and then he shoots down that 0, and I'm like, yes, you had your arc. Great. They showed the action. Of that very heroic man.
I mean, is it worth mentioning John Voight as FDR?
Great. I think that's a great depiction of FDR.
I think so. It could easily become caricature-like, couldn't it? But I think he does manage to just about keep it in that kind of respectful and I don't think he ever used his disability in that sense of making a point there, but it works for what
it's a powerful moment in the film.
Yes.
But yeah,
the one guy I think that is woefully miscast is Dan Aykroyd, because he pulled me out of it every time.
That's because you know who Dan Aykroyd is, I suppose.
Yeah, but it was just like it was Elwood giving like
that's like making Woody Harrelson Nimitz.
Yeah, that pulled me out of it as well.
It's weird.
It's Tom Selleck's Eisner again, isn't it? It's those. It depends what age
they're doing
you are
their best with it, and
how you don't let it go.
It's completely fine.
Yeah.
I mean, my main problem as a firearms historian with the depiction of Pearl Harbor is that none of the deck guns have the correct firing rate sound effects or work in the right way, which is not something that the other films struggle with. Take Midway.
Which is ironic.
In Midway.
Yeah, sorry.
Go on.
Wins an Oscar for best sound, so it's ironic that nothing sounds right.
Yeah, well, this is just a tiny part. I mean, the rest of the film's pretty good when it comes to the sound, but I just noticed that they all sound like MG42s. They've all got very
I didn't notice that. I mean,
well, now you will forevermore.
Forevermore now. I mean, we may well come back to Pearl Harbor in our kind of closing comments right now, but we've got a couple more films to tackle and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I mean, even that image there, that's an amazing image, isn't it? I mean, that
brilliant
face value. That's the same shot as in Tora, Tora, Tora. And that's arguably a bit better than the one in Tora, Tora, Tora.
Mm-hmm.
On that simple screen image there. But
really,
it's not I want to make it clear, it's not a good movie, but it portrays the attack on Pearl Harbor, I think, very, very well with regard to Battleship Row and the Navy aspect. That's my
exactly. If you remove Affleck doing any acting and Hart doing any acting, I think it improves that sequence beyond all measure. Because if you get rid of like him screaming, "Danny, get me in a plane," Danny can't get you in a plane any quicker. You're both going to the plane. Don't worry about him. There's no need you shouting it every 5 minutes. It's just unnecessary. And I think the whole 40 scenes of them dogfighting are quite boring compared to the actual depiction of Battleship Row and all of that. I would much rather have them shown less of the flying part, because it's just him like going like cockpit, which that controls are not designed to do that. It's rubbish. If they'd shown more of Battleship Row, I think it would have been even better. But yeah,
no, definitely. I mean, people just ask us to comment about the Japanese portrayal in it, and basically they're kind of not really. I mean, they are a bit, but it's kind of. I think they're putting those moments in for people to dive into their popcorn bags and go to the toilet and come back. I don't think they're really wanting you to follow it's not integral to where the film is going. Where Tora, I keep getting my Toras wrong, but Tora is trying to show both nations equally. Pearl Harbor is American we better throw a little bit of Japanese stuff in there, otherwise they'll say we're not doing it. I don't think they really care about it particularly.
No, and they have that weird bit where I don't even know if it's true either, but they, the Japanese commander, naval commander, looks up at his kids playing with his kites, and he's like, has to be an air attack. And I'm like,
that's a bit.
That didn't happen. Surely,
yeah,
it's just ham-fisted again. It's like, oh god,
it's again guilty, and there's 3 of these movies do it, but they all have that quote from Yamamoto where he says, "I fear we've awoken a sleeping giant," and there's no evidence he ever said that anywhere.
No. Yeah, if it did, it's a post-war thing, isn't it? That's what the agreement is these days. But we identify that with that now, don't we? So but we could carry on and talk about that. We may well return to Pearl Harbor, the movie Pearl Harbor, but let's move on. I know we're going out of logical sequence. I wanted to do Pearl Harbor immediately after Tora, because I think they kind of are comparisons. Because here is the weirdest and yet actually quite rewarding take on Pearl Harbor, because it's not really about Pearl Harbor. So Robbie, give us a rundown. If you haven't heard of this movie, give us a 2-minute rundown of what it's all about.
Final Countdown is a promotional video for the USS Nimitz while being a Twilight Zone episode all in the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, good. But you should have done the taglines. Yeah.
It's amazing. I absolutely loved it. It feels like an extended Twilight Zone episode with 2 really charismatic leads who, in my opinion, I was like, how is Sheen coming off of Apocalypse Now going to play off of aging Kirk Douglas? And they mirror each other so well. Sheen's playing this sort of this civilian guy who works for the Ministry of Defense, but then he becomes a bit of a wannabe history changer, godlike character where he wants to play God, and Kirk Douglas is just playing this nice captain who just doesn't know whether he should or shouldn't. It's a great little film. It's a lovely little film.
There's a few people who said they haven't heard of it. So essentially, it starts in 1980. The USS Nimitz is out on maneuvers, gets caught in a storm, finds itself time traveled back to December the 6th, 1941, and is in a position where it could influence the outcome of Pearl Harbor by intercepting, if it wants to, the Japanese fleet and preventing it happening. And Martin Sheen is kind of the conscience of the viewer, saying, if we do this, we're messing up with that whole thing that Red Dwarf. But
then he says, do it.
If you mess up with the timeline, do you change everything? And then there's a Japanese character because they encounter people from 1941 because there's a boat out there with a senator on it it's a Twilight Zone episode. But
and a dog. there's a dog, and he causes all kinds of
Charlie
problems.
the dog.
Yeah.
Charlie the dog. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the reason I wanted to include it in this is we talk about it on World War II TV, and historians talk about the counterfactual. They talk all the time about what would have happened if. Now, no one, when they're discussing about what went wrong at Arnhem, ever talks about what if something for the future had gone back. What if we? But it does present that what if something else happened possibility that is something that we historians talk about, and it kind of essentially you could use that to say, what about if the US Navy had known about the attack and they had anticipated it? How much would that have changed things? And I guess again, in 1980, you're still 40 years after war. A lot of most of the World War II veterans are still around. Maybe if they're going to see it, they're thinking maybe things might have taken a different course. And what would have happened if it asks the questions? What would have happened if Pearl Harbor hadn't happened? I said that's what it's kind of asking, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. But it does it in a fun way as well. It doesn't do it in a completely straight down the line way.
No,
it's at its heart, it knows it's a little bit of I would dare to say kind of B-movie-esque sort of, popcorny thriller.
It's supposed to be a blockbuster, isn't it? It's supposed to be fun, and it's a moral quandary wrapped in a sci-fi movie, really. It's really interesting. I really like this film, just for a film point of view, not for the fact it's about Pearl Harbor, because it uses they're quite clever actually. They take bits from Tora and make it monochrome rather than color, and pass it off as sort of like newsreel stuff. Oh God, that reminds me, I need to mention the terrible, awful newsreel voiceovers in Pearl Harbor before I forget about them again.
I forgot about them. Yeah,
awful.
And the fact,
they're so bad.
That newsreel as well, when it says it's 1941, shows a Cromwell tank.
Oh, it does in
Pearl Harbor.
There's a clip of Cologne, I think it is.
That's it. That's the one. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh,
5 years late or 4 years too early, but
But there's a great thing talking about pictures and how they're reused. There's a great bit in this in the final countdown where they use that iconic picture of Battleship Row, and they poise as if the navigation one of the reconnaissance planes from the Nimitz took it, and then they go and find it, and it's as if that photo is like taken in 1940, but by the Nimitz. I really
that's a
love
clever bit, isn't it? Yeah, they
really
match up the angle, and that's when Martin Sheen realizes, because they haven't realized they've gone back in time yet. But the photo comes back, and Martin Sheen, who's the historian, isn't it? Or is he the historian? And
he's a military industrial complex contractor who's come aboard to problem solve. But
there is a guy who knows his history, isn't there?
Yeah,
and
he's
one of the ships that would have been there.
The Combat Air Group Commander, the CAG, is an amateur historian. Yeah, and he's next door. And Martin Sheen has this nice habit of nipping into his room and going through his stuff whenever he's not in there. It's very bizarre. You just wouldn't do it. You got caught once. You wouldn't do it again, but he does.
Yeah, but I mean, we might come back to that, but we kind of move on now to the last movie that we may sum up some, and that's the most recent portrayal, which again, it's not about Pearl Harbor, but it does start with Pearl Harbor. So Midway 2019, we can talk about it as a general review of the movie anyway, but it does tackle Pearl Harbor. And this is kind of a Michael Bay for today, isn't it? It's full, no holds barred, blockbuster, lots of budget. So let's Matt, you give us the opening salvo on Midway, and it's Pearl Harbor portrayal.
Yeah, it's as you say, it's another one that tries to do an awful lot in one film, and it's not quite 3 hours as Pearl Harbor is. But we do get within, I think, about 20 minutes in, we get the attack on Pearl Harbor. It's just, for me, it's a little bit too overblown, CGI wise. It feels whenever they do sequences with actors interacting, the lighting isn't quite right for the CGI, and you can feel that they're on a blue screen or a green screen stage, and it just doesn't work. It's too clean, it's too by the book, in that they know exactly when to jump and move because they've rehearsed it dozens of times.
Yeah.
The actual CGI itself, I don't think stands up as well as Bay's Pearl Harbor 01 does, because he tries to combine practical effects and CGI where there's there's some is it Spruance class frigates that get strafed and bombed, and they're all in a little row. They're not the right era of ship, but that's practical effects. And then the shots of the battleship row itself are CGI. But with this, I just think the wide shots like this one aren't too bad. They're on a par with the CGI of Pearl Harbor. But when you get to the bits where the two battleships are on fire, and there's some of the guys are trying to get across from one to the other by a rope, it just doesn't look real at all. It's so poorly done. It just doesn't look right.
It takes you out of the peril because it feels like a video game, and
yes,
and because as you say, at its heart, Pearl Harbor had aircraft actually flying in between ships. Sometimes the wrong ship from 30 years too late, but it was an aircraft flying between ships. This is pretty much done by geeks sitting behind computer keyboards, and it feels like geeks behind computer keyboards putting it together. And it doesn't place you, to me, that doesn't place it, except the bits I do like in the film are the American dive bombing bits. That when you really are feeling the G-force, they are its redeeming qualities for me, which no movie has ever really recreated. I mean, I think it's overblown. Genuine people who fly say it's too much, but it does kind of take you out of your seat there a little bit, and you are feeling that kind of like a roller coaster yourself. You're feeling that inertia going down there. But also thoroughly unsympathetic characters.
The lead pilot is so irritating.
Ed Screen,
I want to punch him every minute he's on screen. He just annoys the out of me.
Yeah, he played the bad guy in Deadpool before he did this, and I think he was still trying to play the bad guy at Deadpool at times. He's very unlikable. I didn't like this one because it's trying to be something for everyone. It's like, so we're going to show the Doolittle raid, we're going to show everything else. It takes the bits out of Pearl Harbor that didn't really work, like the Doolittle raid bits, and does more of it. But I think from doing some research, I found out maybe why it is a bit all over the shop, as it feels, at least to me, is it had something like 10 production companies behind it who each put up a lot of money. And it was Chinese production companies as well. So everyone puts their hand in, and Roland Emmerich's vision, I think, just gets muddied and sullied. There's too much reliance on green screen. You can tell people aren't standing in front of things at times. Reuses the same shots a lot. If I saw that shot of the Japanese anti-aircraft gun going off once, I saw it 1,000 times, and it just becomes too repetitive. And again, I think with Tora, like we said, the cast is a little bit B team as well.
Yeah,
Woody
really.
Harrelson is good. But he's not. I mean, he maybe was in the early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, but he's not a leading man. Unfortunately, he's a good actor, but not a leading man. There's no one you can pin your hat on this movie and go and see it because of this performance. It's just a bit flat and bland. I think I seen it once. I have no drive to go and see it again. If I'm really honest,
it's just it. But me, Colin, and Duncan, we saw it in Arnhem of all places. We watched a Midway movie, but we were in Arnhem on a battlefield tour there, and we all kind of came out going, "You just kind of, It was just a bit. I mean, I've watched it since, and I haven't really changed my opinion of it. I mean, I do like it. Does kind of do the code breaking ultra side of things that the earlier movies couldn't do fully because we hadn't released or purple codes, all that stuff. I'm guessing even when Tora was made, that a lot of that background hadn't been released. They actually refer to it as magic, don't they, in Tora. So they do explain it more. So that character's quite done, the Rocheforts and the code breaking and all that kind of stuff. But it's not a good movie, is it really? And
which is a shame because Roland Emmerich has made some of the great blockbusters. He's done a lot of good stuff like. Oh, what was it? Is it Deep Impact? No, I can't remember now.
Independence Day.
Independence Day. That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah,
and After, I think, as well. The disaster one. Yeah.
Yes, he can do these epics, but it just doesn't feel like his film to me. It just feels very sort of muddied and
it's okay. It's not a great film. It's passable. They've made some efforts to be historically accurate with it in places, and the chronology that they're doing is about right from what I know, but. In terms of a lot of the main actors, it's just, and the problem with it is, because of the green screen and the CGI and the unbelievableness of it, it just doesn't feel right. It 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 doesn some of the actual actions and events that people really did do during the attack on Pearl Harbor and Midway for this film, they don't seem believable. They just seem like things that have been made up by Hollywood.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And it subtracts from that.
It feels like an extended demo reel for a CGI piece of software rather than a movie at times as well.
Which is why I think that my appreciation, perhaps is too strong a word, for Pearl Harbor is there because this is so much worse. Because where Pearl Harbor seemed really overblown back in 2001, it doesn't seem as overblown now because things have gone way more overblown now because they can do it. Let's crank everything up. It's the Spinal Tap everything up to 11 now, isn't it? In movies now because they can. So everything, the latest Star Wars trilogy, everything is. You want a space battle? You don't want 10 ships. You want 10,000 ships. Everything is cranked. You don't want one Sith. You want a whole planet of Siths. And it kind of falls in that category.
As I agree, Woody, we're used to this level of CGI now, I think we've become numb to it. And where we don't is when we can look back at 2001, and we know how technology has jumped. So we can go back and look at it and go, hang on, actually, 2001, that is really impressive at times. And we can give it its dues. But because this movie's come out 2 years ago now, and we're post Avengers, we're post Star Wars, and we're all that sort of franchise. Post Transformers, yes, exactly. All this CGI just gets a bit boring because it's some guy in a room who's just bought a set of planes and just put them in as he wants them. There's no one flying. I'm a bit bored of it, really.
Which is why, and I'm not trying to kind of make out Pearl Harbor to be a brilliant movie, but it does bridge old movie making with modern movie making. And as you said there, Robbie, it's practical effects and CGI, but you are there in Hawaii. Yes, there are modern ships in the background. Yes, there are things that shouldn't be there, but you do feel you're genuinely seeing still aircraft flying along between hangars and flying along between ships, as you did with Tora, as you did even with From Here to Eternity. With this,
there's a depth to it all.
Yeah, it's truly multi-dimensional. Which before we might go back to things, but you wanted to bring in the video game aspect because that was one of the things that brought you in this. So I have no frame of reference with this. So what are we talking about here, Robbie?
So for those who don't know, me and Matt, I'm 28, Matt's in his early 30s. So this is sort of our ballpark of our touchstone for Pearl Harbor, for me at least, and about Matt. But this is Medal of Honor Rising Sun. It came out in 2003, and the first mission is you defend the USS California, and that character there holding the shotgun and the BAR was voiced by Del Dye. Fans of the show will know who that is. And you get thrown a BAR, and you set about shooting down Zeros, and then you jump into a PT boat, and you defend the ships, and then at the end it sort of transitions into this cutscene where the main character and his buddy are really happy about what they've done. And Gunny, voiced by Del Dye, goes, turn around, take a good hard look and think about those boys that didn't make it out. And it shows you in PlayStation 2 graphics, the damaged ships. But then it goes on to have a newsreel of real footage and shows you how the US were brought into the war. But for me, I was 11 when that game came out. So for me, when I think of Pearl Harbor, when you messaged me, Woody, to go, can we do a show on Pearl Harbor? I immediately thought of this first mission from Medal of Honor, because to me that's the Pearl Harbor attack in my head.
Yeah, it's kind of often your favorite Bond is the first one you saw, whether or not it's the best Bond. It's the one that meant something to you when you were little. That's it. The Star Wars trilogy, it's which one hit you when you were 12. That's going to be the one that you remember going forward, whether it's the better one or not. It's what means most to you at the time you watch it that first time. But in summary, there's good things and bad things about every movie. Midway, there's very little good, isn't there? Let's be honest. There's very little redeeming qualities out of Midway. Maybe the dive bombing, and that's it. But all the other movies we've done, there have been good things and there have been bad things. We kind of, are we in agreement that Tora is the best of the bunch?
Yes.
Yeah, we are, aren't we?
Tora is the best of the bunch. And then if you take out Ben Affleck acting from the Pearl Harbor sequence in Pearl Harbor, then I think that is one of the most affecting depictions of the film. If you combine all of not only the attack but also the aftermath, so they're triaging patients in the hospital, and Beckinsale's character is very adamant that she doesn't want to do it, but she has to do it because it's a duty. She goes outside and does triage, and then as you said, Paul, we don't know how he gets to the Arizona to try and help the rescue effort, but he does, and that scene with the hands, hugely powerful, really powerful.
And let's talk about the portrayal of women, because we've got women watching the show today, because Midway reverts back to the ladies waving them off with hankies, doesn't it? And kind of don't let my husband get killed, and then running out at the end crying kind of thing. I mean, the hairstyles are very good. I mean, we could talk about the various movies in terms of their authenticity, because I think Pearl Harbor and Midway have a good sense generally of place and time. The hairstyles, the music, all that is very good generally. But Midway, as I said, goes back to the simpering woman who actually just waves her husband off. Even what's the officer, the not the code breaking guy, but the intelligence operator. What's his name? The character's name in Midway.
Gosh.
Or the actor's name, but the guy with glasses. Anyway, him. His wife is just there to kind of literally just there to make sure he's eating. Remember, she says to him, "Have you eaten anything tonight?" And you think that's, you should don't. She's not a strong character.
Wade McCluskey, that guy was, I think, wasn't it?
No, he's McCluskey.
Oh, sorry, no. Edwin Layton.
Layton. That's it, Layton. Yeah. His wife is just there to make sure he's got his sandwiches. So if we're talking about, which we are, I try and have female guests on World War II TV. We're in an inclusive era, all that. Pearl Harbor, for that reason alone, Kate Beckinsale character is a kick-ass, strong female character who is making her own decisions, rescuing people, saving lives, and that is another redemption quality for Pearl Harbor. And from Here to Eternity, we go back to that. The girls in that, they're the weaker. The plot lines are driven by the men. I know it's the 1950s, but it's all about Frank Sinatra, Montgomery Clifton, Bat Lancaster. I suppose Deborah Carr is a strong character, but they're still second to the men. So any now we've talked about all the films.
Yeah.
Kind of where are we generally in the portrayal of Pearl Harbor on screen? Are we still waiting for something to come out that will combine all the best of all what we've seen and put it all together?
I'd like a film that just portrays, is it Dory, who wins the Medal of Honor?
Dory Miller, yeah.
Dory Miller. If we can have a film about him, that would be really nice and interesting, because that's something that's touched upon in a couple of these movies, but isn't fully realized. I think that'd be really nice, because it would be another take, another angle, and I think there are some brilliant, fantastic young black actors coming through that could play him, and then some. Maybe take Michael B. Jordan, someone like that could really do him justice. I think that'd be really great. And then obviously it might just be nice to sort of maybe just try it from. I don't know. It's. I think after watching all of these movies, the attack scene in itself, that can be bombastic and interesting. But when I come away, I'm thinking, I want to know about that guy on that machine gun. I want to know about that guy trying to get in that plane. I want to know more about the men on the ground as they actually were, rather than a fictionalized person or an officer. I'd rather see something from a small point of view, someone's normal person's point of view. But I think, as we said, I think Tora is a straight down the line retelling is the one that I'd recommend. But if you want to see a good depiction of the actual air attack, then I would say Pearl Harbor. But just watch that 10-minute sequence. That's all you have to do.
And we are down to that ultimate dilemma with filmmaking about World War II, is trying to convey the deaths of thousands and make you care about the deaths of thousands via the viewpoint of a few characters, because that's what storytelling is on screen. And Tora, we said it establishes the generals and admirals and colonels and the intelligence officers and all those people very well, but doesn't really put you there with the guys who are dying on the ships and it's spectacle in a sense. But Pearl Harbor does put you there with the men on the ships that are going down and the men drowning in the water. Midway fails in that regard. I Bombed Pearl Harbor completely misses the mark in that, and it's all just, as we said, model kits going off. I think in a weird way, we're coming back to the John Ford 1943 propaganda film, because it was real footage. It does have that gravitas of, you're kind of seeing reality there. And those clips we have of the real event are probably the best way of conveying to an audience the tragedy of the loss of life, because you're seeing reality. You're seeing those photos we know of, the ones we know of Battleship Row there. A look at one of those images conveys more about loss of life than all of these movies put together, I suppose. But then movies aren't there to do the job of remembrance. They're there to entertain. That's their fundamental reason. Yes. But, again, we've watched all these movies. Got a closing thoughts about, bring us out there, Matt, with your kind of final comments about Pearl Harbor on screen or World War II movies on screen, and what do you think the future holds, and final thoughts, really.
Well, obviously it's been depicted in film so many times because it's one of the most sort of traumatizing moments in American history, isn't it? It's the worst defeat of the American military in terms of the 20th century, and it comes as a complete surprise to the nation at the time. And it's interesting that Pearl Harbor 01 came out just months before 9/11. But interestingly, there's one point of view that I wanted to bring up on Pearl Harbor is Kenneth Taylor, who was one of the pilots of the P-40s that did get airborne, and he called it a piece of trash, over sensationalized and distorted, which I think is interesting. I think if he'd seen some of the other depictions, perhaps if he'd seen Midway, he would have been a little bit more revisionist on his opinion of Pearl Harbor, perhaps. But I think with it being such a critical point of America's military history and wider history in the 20th century, it's unsurprising that they've made all of these films about it, with the vast majority of them being American produced. Whether it needs another one, I don't know. There's plenty of other things that the money could be put towards to tell stories of and raise awareness of from other aspects of the war.
And I think it seems it leaves us with the fact that, I'm speaking for myself, but I know you two guys as well, a lot of the films we love with regards to war films are the ones where they don't even pretend to put you in reality. The Kelly's Heroes, the Where Eagles Dare, the Wild Geese, all those kind of ones, that because they're not portraying anything like real events, they can have as many people die or not die, and whatever perils and dangers they put their people in, it doesn't matter. It's not real. Guns of Navarone doesn't even exist. It's not even, there is an island called that. Everything is fake. So you're not under any pressure as a filmmaker to honor anybody or do anything right. With Pearl Harbor, if you say you're making a movie about Pearl Harbor or Midway, people like us, historians and movie lovers, are there. Well, come on then, prove you're worthy of taking on this challenge. So
get it right.
Robbie, what's
at your peril? Yeah,
it's exactly what I say. I say it nearly every other week on the show when we're not doing the sort of adventure commando type-esque stories that aren't true. And as you said, like Kelly's Heroes, things like that, you can just enjoy. I always think if you're going to do a by the numbers retelling, you get it as 100% right as you can. We've talked to military advisors on the podcast who say it costs you no more money to get it right if you hire us. So you're doing a disservice to the events, you're doing a disservice to all the men that lost their lives and served, and you're doing a disservice to your audience, because they're going to come away thinking what they saw was true when it isn't. So I think moving forward, we need to see more. If you're going for 100% historically accurate retelling, bloody do it. If you're going for a daring do boys' own adventure tale of the Second World War, or any war for that matter, that's fine. But we need the distinction between based on a true story and telling a true story. And I think that's where I want to see the genre going forward, going into. But we'll see if it happens.
Yes,
so that's my
making a clear delineation, saying so that the industry kind of branching into two movements of war films: the real ones and the fun ones, and not pretending to try and.
Where
do
would
both
you place
the same
this?
Thing.
Where would you guys how would you weigh this against Saving Private Ryan? So if you take Saving Private Ryan as the pinnacle of ETO D-Day, filmmaking cinema of the late 20th century, would you say that Pearl Harbor is on a par with that? I wouldn't.
No, I wouldn't.
But is it the film that creates the most cultural awareness and iconographical sort of that's Pearl Harbor. When you see when you see a scene like that's on screen right now, is that what is in everyone's popular consciousness now?
I think the good, if Saving Private Ryan, I mean, I'm a D-Day guy. That's my thing. That first 25 minutes of Saving Private Ryan is really, really good. The rest of the movie isn't, and it's a
diminishing Men on a Mission movie, isn't it? Really,
it's a diminishing returns movie for me. Each time I rewatch it, it goes down a little bit in my estimation. I absolutely loved it for a while, and I still don't not love it, but I watch it and I notice more things. And I would say that the best bit of Pearl Harbor, so that this bit here, the ship bit, the battleship row bit, is nearly as good as the beach scene in Saving Private Ryan. But the rest of Pearl Harbor, the worst of Pearl Harbor, is way worse than the worst of Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah,
so
I think that's the issue for me. You can enjoy Saving Private Ryan the whole way through, and it's a good story, and it has great set pieces. Pearl Harbor is one decent set piece on the backdrop of a boring love triangle, and then they've thrown in Doolittle raid at the end just to show the American audience at the time that you can fight back. It's a wishy-washy mess.
Here's the thing, because I hadn't watched Pearl Harbor for 10 years, and when I started watching it again, I couldn't remember who she ended up with. Now, if you're I can quite happily watch a film where the romance is the integral part of the story. I'm not a robot World War II guy, but if you've watched a movie that's about a relationship, you'll remember that relationship forever and ever. A really good movie about people falling in love, you don't ever forget. But the fact I'd forgotten who she ended up with, I think, proves the point of the fact that whole love story thing just didn't work, because I didn't have the emotional investing in those characters to really give a shit whether she ended up single or
the thing about it is that beginning third of the movie is a love triangle, and it's not a well done love triangle because Kate Beckinsale is the only one that can act, and they're not given a great deal. So you get little vignettes of good parts, like the introduction of the nurses and some of the bits where they're getting their medical, and that's, it's nice, it's funny. But then you get to the serious part of the film, which is the attack on Pearl Harbor. The tone switches, it becomes serious. There's elements of being patriotic, which is understandable. There's a brilliant shot of chaps in the water swimming. A torpedo goes underneath them, bullets are coming into the water, and there's the essence of an American flag, which is from a sunken ship at this point. Beautiful shot, great cinematography, decent effects. But then they have that whole Doolittle raid thing tacked onto the end of it, which is unnecessary because it's trying to give closure to a story that began at the beginning of the film, which you no longer care about.
Yeah, you've lost.
You don't know whether you did
anything. It's too long. Yeah, it's too long. It's too overambitious. Just reading the words Michael Bay and Jerry Bruckheimer is a red flag for me, because all they've done at that moment at that point in their career is blockbusters, and that's explosive blockbusters with no real important plot, shall we say. And then to let them loose on this, which at the time I think it was one of the most expensive movies ever made by one studio, Disney, 140 million, and for them to sort of, I think they probably wasted a lot of it on the Pearl Harbor sequence, rightly so, but then the rest of the movie just isn't worth watching. And I think that's what it boils down to, is, for me at least, it's just that initial love triangle isn't strong enough to survive the film.
Perhaps as a point of reference, you might find this interesting. On Rotten Tomatoes, the review aggregate site, Pearl Harbor has a 1-star, 24% rating. By contrast, Tora has a 55% rating.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. If I can end with a BBC review from 2001 that I found, because I think it sums it up. This 40-minute, this is talking about the Pearl Harbor sequence and after. This 40 minutes orgy of explosions, carnage, and special effects will bombard audiences into submission with the same devastating efficiency as the Japanese brought onto the surprise assault. But once the bombs stop falling, the film returns to its mawkish central romance, and our sense of disappointment is not alleviated by a protracted and unnecessary third act set in Tokyo. By then, though, you've probably had your money's worth.
Yeah. Pretty much sums it up, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I mean, it's but as I say, my closing thoughts are that the attack sequence in Pearl Harbor makes it worth watching again. Just kind of fast forward to it through the bits before that are boring, but
Yeah.
So if I had a relative who had died on one of those ships, I would feel that movie. This is the cross I'm going to die on. Is a hill I'll die on. Does a good job of portraying that death of those hundreds, thousands of guys very well, and it's the only movie that does that in that way. But yeah, the rest of it is awful. And Tora is by clearly the head of the pack in terms of the historical retelling. But maybe, as I said, we're waiting for someone to just say, okay, I'm going to treat this as a proper historical event now and go back to the Tora kind of ambition of following the storyline, but with a bit more modern CGI, but used sparingly and appropriately, and remake it. A remake of Tora could be the best thing, maybe.
Perhaps so.
I think so.
And we can all agree that Final Countdown's a fun movie.
And Final Countdown, it's
absolutely adore it. Yeah,
it's the weird drugged out cousin in the Pearl Harbor movie. It falls into the category, but it's the kind of the oddball that you kind of only invite around the house at Christmas. But it's really entertaining. But it's not.
You could sit in the pub and have a real deep conversation about, would a Tomcat take down a Zero? Because would the heat-seeking missiles from a Tomcat lock onto a Zero? Would the Zero's tighter turning circle be better in a dogfight?
How would that Japanese pilot
You can
know
get
to shoot
really
in
down into the nitty-gritty on that one, but
there's lots of questions. I think that's its point. It's trying to raise questions as well, and it does that very well. And it's an interesting combination of young Martin Sheen and Kirk Douglas and Charles Durning is in it. Of course, another World War II veteran is in it. But we're kind of in the point where we're kind of running around things now. But just for those who have not yet found the Fighting on Film podcast, in which case, why have you not found the Fighting on Film podcast? You've come here as guests. It's not your first time you did the Great Escape show with you, but where are you two now with where you're taking the podcast? What's coming up? What are your plans? How is it going? Is it reaching your expectations? Give us the rundown for those who don't know who you are.
Do you want me to start, Matt? Or?
Well, right now we're in the middle of Dirty Dozen December. We're 2 films in. The first one came out last week, and the second one came out this week. So right now we're working our way through all of the Dirty Dozen movies, but the plan is to just keep on doing what we've been doing. We're going to take a look at classic and current films and take a look at their historical context, what the actual making of the films, the historical accuracy and that sort of thing. Rob can probably give it a little bit more justice than I can.
So just because you do we've covered 6-7 movies in an hour and a half. You do one movie in an hour.
One movie a week.
Don't you? So you can much deeper dive.
Yeah, we take movies 1 hour, an hour and a half to an hour every week, and we have guests. So if you're a fan of The Bridge Too Far, we had 3 members of the Attenborough's Private Army come on. APA had them on for special guests. We've had Al Murray, we've had James Holland, but we really love to get into war movies because we're war movie fans. And there's nothing better than watching a movie, chatting, waxing lyrical about it with one of your best pals and releasing it every week. But if you're into war movies as much as we are and as much as Woody is, and you just like a little bit more of a behind-the-curtain look at some of your favourite war films, then please do check us out. You can find us at fightingonfilm.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at Fighting on Film, and I think it's below.
Everything is in the description below, folks. And so I've been a guest on your show a couple of times, and would love to come back again. And
you will, don't worry,
because
we'll have you on again.
This is the thing that the weird thing is that the reach of a war film is way greater than all the books by our favorite historians put together in a year. Midway. It's a shame, but it's a big old.
It's a hefty weight that films carry, though, isn't it? It's that. It gets back to that discussion we had a moment ago about, do we make historically accurate war films? They carry a lot on their shoulders. Yeah, and
that's the thing. The reach they have is enormous, and where we can assimilate them and we can say that did happen and this didn't happen. We've got that historical background to kind of take them apart accurately. A lot of viewers don't have that, and they take everything they see in a movie, be it Dunkirk or 1917 or Bridge Too Far, whatever it would be, and they everything they believe, and these things become reality. That's it. Well, a lot of people's images of the war is now through the lens of the war movies they've seen, and we have to deal with that. And it's fantastic that you guys are taking these movies apart and looking at these things and looking at what they say and how are they put together and where they are in our understanding of the events of the past, and the fact we just love watching them because they're fun. So that's it. So we'll talk about that. I'll just remind you what we got coming up tomorrow, and I'll come back and say goodbye in a second. So folks, back to serious stuff again tomorrow. So we're talking about the hospitals in Pearl Harbor tomorrow with my guest, and then we've got Medal of Honors awarded at Pearl Harbor or for events in Hawaii on December the 7th on Friday, and then Craig Simons rounding off the week with a look at the Battle of the Coral Sea, which followed Pearl Harbor. And as usual, folks, don't forget to check us out on Twitter. Check out Fighting on Film on Twitter. Become a patron of ourselves. Become a patron of Fighting on Film. Follow all of us on social media. You'll see me, Robbie, and Matt exchanging messages and stuff and comments on Twitter. That's where we kind of live. So please consider doing that. But right now, I just want to thank Matt and Robbie for joining us. It's been a good chat, isn't it, really? And people didn't get too angry when we said that Pearl Harbor isn't totally awful. I think they were a bit reeling a bit with it, but I think we made a good case, I think. So did you enjoy it?
We flew through the flak there, didn't we? We made it.
We flew through the flak. We got through it unscathed, and so great talking to you guys. So well, that's it. We'll see you all again. So this is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV saying I'll see you all again tomorrow night. Thank you very much for your attention this evening. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye. Thank you.